Professor, how are you?
Yeah. Hello, I'm great. How are you?
Okay, we just finished the briefing conference with Professor Edvinson.
Yes.
He makes some advertising about your presentation. So you have a huge responsibility here today.
Very
Okay.
good. Hope I can go for that.
Okay, so the word's yours, okay?
Okay, so you do have the slides on the screen? Great. So, hello everybody. Hi. I'm honored to speak to you in Rio de Janeiro from Berlin. I think it's also a great opportunity to test the virtual presentation techniques here. I hope this will work. So, as you might have heard from Professor Resende, who thank you very much for this invitation, and maybe also heard from Professor Leif Edvinson, who we've been working with for a couple of years now, that we here at the Fraunhofer Institute are engaging in intellectual capital statements specifically and in knowledge management in general for around 10 to 15 years now. And I would like to give you a very short insight of what we've been doing here in Germany and Europe, and also in a pilot project in Rio de Janeiro last year. So maybe that's also interesting for you. So if we go to the second slide, just as a very brief introduction, because I don't know how many of you are familiar with the so-called Fraunhofer Gesellschaft or Fraunhofer Society. This is one of the largest research institutions in Europe for applied research. Of course, there are other ones that are as big or maybe even bigger that are concentrated on basic research, but our focus is really on applied research. What does that mean? Well, in general, it's about being very practical, being very close to the industry and to other kinds of businesses, and trying to develop new technologies, new methodologies for the industry, together with the industry. That's our mission, you could say. In this context, when we go to the next slide, you see that we here at the Fraunhofer IPK, which is one of 60 different institutes we have in the whole Fraunhofer Society, we have designed a holistic knowledge management approach that is the basis for everything we do in that area. And what you can see here is that we say knowledge management is not only technology, not only people, not only processes, but it's something where everything goes together. And if we do it very systematically, we could differentiate between three phases or pillars that you see here. The first one is the strategic approach to knowledge management, trying to answer the question, where should we start with KM? Because as you might know, there are a lot of little things you can do in a company to improve the handling of knowledge, but where do I have the best results? Where do I have the highest impact on my business goals, my business objectives? So that's what we're trying to find out in this first pillar called KM Strategy and Analysis. And the tool we use is the intellectual capital statement. And actually, I would like to focus on this topic for today, but just to give you the whole picture in the beginning now here, this would be just the starting point for a complete or holistic knowledge management approach in a company or any kind of organization. So if we start with that first pillar and have answered the question, where should we start with IC? Where should we start to invest? Where do we have the highest effects, best impact? Then, in the next step, in the second pillar, we can design the right operational tools and methods to be implemented into the business processes. That is our approach, where we think this is important to, again, focus the efforts in knowledge management on the business relevant things. So we always start from the actual processes in the company. For example, the design process, or the sales process, or the marketing process, or the production process. And these kind of core processes of the company, we try to find out where is knowledge generated, where is it applied, where is it stored, and how can we improve this so that we have a kind of closed circle of the handling of knowledge within the business processes of the company. If we have designed those solutions, now it's about time to implement those solutions, those methods and tools. And that's the third pillar, which we call KM, implementation and development, which means when we try to implement and really bring those solutions to life, we have to think about how to get the people involved, actually, because at the end of the day, it's about having the people, the staff in the company, having a change in their behavior, using a tool, using some kind of method in a specific process. So how can we support this change of behavior in the staff, in the people? That's, as we found out, and now, as I said, 10, 15 years experience with knowledge management, maybe the hardest part, the most important part, but also the part which is, well, kind of forgotten sometimes, because people tend to concentrate on the technical solutions and forget to get the people involved. And that's why we also think it's important to start with that first pillar, which I would now like to give you some more insight in, because actually our method for this first pillar of KM strategy, the intellectual capital statement, is already a method also to involve the people. I will show you in a minute how that works. When we go to the next slide, slide number 4, this has an overview for you to know our background here. First, we started in around 2003, 2004 with the, yes? Actually, the one before, the German pilot project. Slide number 4, do you have this one? Exactly. Exactly. Great, thank you. So, very quickly, just as an overview, that's the results of the German pilot project, which we started in 2003. Just to show you, we have gone some way. We have around 1,000 companies using the ICS in Germany. We have 100,000 people who ordered the material that has been designed in this pilot project, which is a guideline for practitioners, which you can see on the left side, and a software that we use called the ICS Toolbox, or in German, the Business Finance Toolbox. So that's to show there is some interest. There are things going on in practice in Germany, but if you put the numbers in relation to the overall numbers of companies, you can also see that we also do have some way to go. If we go to the next slide, we can also see that we, in the next step, brought this to the European level and had a pilot project together with some European experts. Of course, Leif Edmondson was involved, and other European research partners like the London School of Economics. And together we, based on our German experiences, and wanted to see how that works on the European level. And again, we could develop and test and show in practice a method for the pragmatic management of intellectual capital in small and medium-sized enterprises. That was the focus first. This is the SME approach here. But in subsequent steps, we also further developed the method, and now it's also applied in large organizations, in research organizations, universities, technology parks, and so on. I will come back to that in a minute. If we go to the next slide and ask ourselves, why is it important to care about intellectual capital and the systematic management of intellectual capital in general? Then we can try to answer this by asking the practitioners. And this is what we did here in Germany in a large online survey among 1,000 businesses in Germany, and asked them what kind of resources, what kind of success factors are how important for your business. And then we clustered the results and aggregated the results, and this is what you see here in this slide, in this diagram, that even today, already today, at least the German businesses say, for our business success, the intangible resources in those categories of human, structural, and relational capital are much more important already than all the tangible resources, like, for example, houses, buildings, machines, plants, other types of tangible resources that you of course need. If you produce something, you still need machines, you still need some raw material. But even there in those production companies, you find that those intangible resources are already more important and have a higher impact on the business success today. And that's for us the main reason why we think we need to look into those intangible resources and find methods for the systematic management, because nowadays we have a lot of methods to manage all the tangible resources in the company, the machines and everything, all those processes, but the intangible assets and the intangible resources are normally not managed systematically yet, and that's why we need a method. That's what was our starting point, to start with a model, which you see in the next slide. That's the basic, let's say, mental model also that we use together with the company when we start to implement an ICS, standing for Intellectual Capital Statement, in the company. So when in the middle you see with the light blue color, the business context. And that's very important in our approach to start with this and ask the companies, what are your value-adding business processes? Or to make it very practical and easy, how do you earn money? And what do you want to achieve at the end of the year? That's the business success. Very simple questions, which every business should be able to answer. But that's very important to start, because that's the context to define what kind of intellectual capital is really relevant and important for you. So our approach says, when we know what the business processes are, what the business success is that is to be achieved, then we can derive what kind of human capital we need. You probably heard that from Leif Edmondson. That's everything that the individual employee brings into the company, all his knowledge, his experience, competencies, attitudes, and so on. The structural capital is everything that is inside the company, all structures and processes that connect the people to bring them together and to support the efficient cooperation within the company. Whereas the relational capital is everything that is connected with the outside world, you could say. All the relations to the external environment of the company, starting with the customer relations, of course, as the main, most important relational capital factor, but also relations to partners, research partners, sales partners, suppliers, investors, and so on. And when we go to the next slide, we can see that in those three categories of IC, we try to define very specifically now for each company those success factors, those factors that are important for the business model, for the business processes of the single company. And what you see here is a list of 15 factors that we use as a starting point, but that can only be a starting point. The very important first step that we now do with the company is to define for each of those headlines what is inside, what is the definition and the understanding of, for example, professional competence, social competence, motivation, and so on in the specific company. So that's the first step, coming from the business model, defining specifically for this business model the specific intellectual capital factors. When we have achieved this, we now go in the next step, and that we can see on the next slide, number 9, into a workshop procedure. And actually that's also a specific approach that we use. There are other approaches for management and measurement of IC out there, but they're mostly focused on indicators. We also use indicators, but before we talk about indicators, we try to have a workshop-based self-assessment approach. Because before you start counting, and you're probably aware of the fact that if you start counting, you can spend a lot of time to define indicators, aggregate the data, and so on. But the question is, what do we do with the data? What does that tell us? So we say, before we start counting in numbers and hard figures, we have a self-assessment procedure in 3 dimensions. That's the quantity, quality, and systematic management of each factor of intellectual capital. On the slide, you can see the example for the structural capital factor product innovation. And imagine we now build a team in the company consisting of representatives from all the most important units. For example, there's the sales guy there, there's the controller, the marketing guy, the production guy, and so on. And we try to have persons from every hierarchical level in the organization, in that team. So we can really have a representative picture of this company in that team when we go through this structured self-assessment procedure. And as you can see here, we ask questions for the quantity, for example. Do we have enough of a factor? For example, do we have enough product innovations today to achieve our goals, to achieve our strategic requirements? The same goes for the quality. Are our product innovations good enough according to our strategic requirements? And also for the systematic management. How systematically do we manage our product innovations? With those three questions for each factor, we can have a very structured and detailed assessment where we, on the one hand, have a value on a scale from 0 to 100%. On the other hand, we have qualitative, and that's very important, qualitative reasonings for those values. Because later, when we want to decide what kind of actions do we want to start, here we find the answers of where do the problems lie specifically in the company, and there we can start from to design actions. But before we design actions, we need to answer the question where should we start? And that is shown on the next slide, number 10. Here, on the right side, you find the so-called IC management portfolio. And actually, that's the visualization of the main results of our intellectual capital analysis, helping the management of a company to answer the question, where should we start to invest? The fast answer to the question is in the upper left quadrant of our management portfolio here. Why is that? Because on the x-axis, on the left side, you see the rather weak factors. On the right side, you see the rather strong factors. And that comes out of this so-called QQS assessment I was showing you on the slide before. QQS standing for quantity, quality, and systematic. The other dimension is an impact analysis, where we try to find out how strong is the impact of each intellectual capital factor on every other factor and the business process and the business success in the end. In that way, on the y-axis, we can answer the question, how important are the different factors? And that is why we can say in this quadrant, in the upper left side of the portfolio, here we found those factors that are rather weak today, showing a high potential for improvement. And if we do something there, if we improve something there, we have a high impact because the influence of the factor on the whole company and its goals is relatively high compared to the other factors. So that's the prioritization. And now we can dig deeper again and say, if we now decide that we have to start, for example, in internal cooperation or employee motivation or leadership ability, then we can dig deeper and say, what are the problems and how can we solve those problems? And not only that, when we go to the next slide, we can now see that we can also use this method to really design those actions so that the actions really support the business goals in the end. Because as you might be aware, you can think of a lot of actions if you find out we have some problems in product innovation, for example. The first question is, what kind of problem do we have? Is it a quantitative problem, a qualitative, or a systematic problem? This we can answer with our QQS assessment. The next question is, how does this relate to other success factors in our company and to our processes and to our results in the end? So what you see in this diagram, which we call the impact map here, is that if we start an improvement action, for example, in the factor of product innovation, we can now see that this company here, it's a German software company, which I used as an example here, says, okay, if we have better and more product innovation, we can improve also our customer relations. This will, in the end, results in a better image on the market. And very interestingly, the company said this will also have feedback result or feedback impact into our company on our employee motivation. Because when the employee sees, for example, in the news, in the paper, in the internet, that he's working for a highly innovative company with a good image on the market, then he's more motivated, not only to work for the company, but, and that's the next step, for sharing his or her knowledge inside the company. So this also supports the cooperation and knowledge transfer inside the company. And this, again, is a driver for better and more product innovation. And in that way, we can show the company and the management where we can find so-called loops in the intellectual capital connected to the results of the company. So you can from here now define very specifically actions to get this loop in motion, to get a motor started, you can say, inside the company. And also what kind of measurements do we need in order to now have also a controlling system to see in the following years, are we on the right track? Are we going to the right direction? Now it would be the right time, in our view and our experience, to talk about indicators for each of those factors that you see here on the map to see, okay, are we on the right way to have more and better product innovation? Does that really affect and improve our customer relations? Does that really affect our image on the market? And so on. Now you can define just the right set of indicators to control your specific strategic development of intellectual capital. That's the idea. To summarize that, you can see on the next slide benefits and the fields of use for this approach of the intellectual capital statement. First of all, it's a diagnosis instrument. Of course, the first important step is to make the things transparent, which are not really, well, tangible, and you cannot see the intellectual capital, so we need something to bring transparency inside the company. What is our important intellectual capital and where are the strengths and weaknesses? That's the first step. Then we can have a decision support system, which I showed you, where we use this management portfolio for intellectual capital for the management of the company to decide where should we start with any kind of knowledge management or organizational development measures. Then we can derive the right optimization and innovation actions, as I was just showing. And not to forget this very important part, which I was mentioning at the beginning, the internal communication is a very important issue, as you're probably aware of. If you want to implement any kind of change in the company, you need to involve people. And the ICS is a means by itself to involve the people, because we have this workshop-based procedure. We involve key staff of the company in this process of ICS to come to a decision collectively where should we start to invest, where do the biggest problems lie, and how can we improve our intellectual capital, and by that our business goals. And to have a common picture of this is a very important starting point to really make it happen, to really make the change happen. And if you start that, then in the next step you can also use the ICS in a continuous way as a monitoring and also as a risk management tool internally. And externally, in the end, you can also use this as a reporting tool. Most interestingly, the starting point for the topic of intellectual capital was this last point, the reporting, the external reporting of intangible assets to investors or other kind of stakeholders. But as we found out, it's very important and actually a higher benefit for the company in the first step if you use it as a management instrument. And if you have done your homework, as we say sometimes to the companies, and have a systematic management internally, then you can also think about using this instrument for the external reporting. We also did some specific projects on that together with banks. If you're interested, I can tell you a little bit more about that later. But just to finish that presentation, going to the next slide, to show you that it's not only working in Germany and Europe, but we have already tested it last year in a pilot project in Rio de Janeiro, initiated by Sebrae, who you probably know very well, and the University PUC in Rio, together with Fraunhofer application. We designed a pilot project for 10 small and medium-sized companies from the oil and gas sector in Rio de Janeiro. And have a so-called ICS factory setting, which is a special implementation procedure to make it very efficient for the small companies. Here on the picture is a workshop day where 4 companies come together for 2 days and implement the whole ICS together with a specifically trained ICS moderator in 2 days. After the 2 days, they can go home, have a report in their hands, and can start implement the right measures to develop their intellectual capital. And what you see on the next slide is a quick survey we did with those 10 companies in Rio de Janeiro, asking what is the biggest benefit from your point of view. And they said the ICS mostly helps me to reflect and refine the business strategy, which is very interesting because we start with a business strategy as an input into the intellectual capital statement, but going through this process, the company and the involved people find out, okay, it's a very structured way to reflect on the business strategy and to refine it, to make it more precise in some points, and also to analyze the strengths and weaknesses, to prioritize the improvement opportunities, and to derive the right actions, and of course to implement this. And this is what it's all about for the practitioners and the small companies, to have something in hand to really get practical and implement something. But the ICS then, in the continuous way, which you can also see on the next slide, is again a means to measure, are we on the right track? If we implement any kind of operational knowledge management action on the right hand here in that slide, we can then, the next year or 2 years after, have again this assessment of the intellectual capital and find out, are we on the right track in the strategic perspective? And in that way, we can generate what we call the closed knowledge management cycle, integrating this strategic approach and the operational approach of knowledge management. And just to conclude and finish this presentation, you see on the last slide the levels of application for this kind of management method, for this intellectual capital statement. As I told you, we started with small and medium-sized companies on the micro level. We went on to large companies where we have big corporations in Germany using this approach, using it actually in different business units, and then consolidating and aggregating this to a corporate ICS. Also in other organizations we tested this method, but then we are now right now actually in a couple of projects involved that are focused on the cluster level. So we are in the European research project right now, which is dedicated to develop intellectual capital method for clusters of SMEs and research partners. Also, I'm talking to people in Brazil actually right now to implement this in a technology park and in regions. And also, we are having some research on the macro level to use this kind of approach really on the national innovation system. This is just as an outlook also for you, to give you an idea what our current topics, research topics are, where we are working on in this field of intellectual capital management. Thank you very much so far for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer any kind of questions if you have any. We will. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Muita novidade aí, né? Acho que está retratando aí, acho que talvez os próximos movimentos de gestão. Deixa eu só ver como é que está a questão do coffee break, porque a ideia era a gente começar a próxima atividade de imediato e deixar o coffee break para mais tarde. A gente tem agora 2 sessões concorrentes, uma do Cefet, apresentando o painel Cefet Unigranrio de Gestão do Conhecimento, e outra na sala ouvidor, o professor Raul Grumba vai estar apresentando o método Grumba de estudo prospectivo, uma questão, apresentando a ferramenta desenvolvida pela empresa dele, que é a Brainstorm. Então, deixa eu só dar uma olhadinha aqui.